Hello, everybody. Welcome to our podcast, Well-Being, Psychological Well-Being, Quality of Life, and Humanity. And in this, today we have the honor and the joy to receive Sophie Maclaren. Sophie Maclaren is a fellow at Oxford University, where she works at the Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Said Business School, as she teaches leadership and mindfulness to MBAs and executives. She specializes in human flourishing, informed by science, with mindfulness and meditation tools, and teaches senior leaders in business and politics globally. She has been a meditation practitioner since childhood and teaches meditation for over 20 years. So it is a great joy to receive you, and we're all eager to talk. Thank you very much for your presence, and thank you very much for your generosity, Sophie.
Oh, David, thank you so much for having me. It's really a delight to be here.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are going to talk about a little bit about artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence. So I would begin recalling us all that we just got out of a severe lockdown due to COVID, which was a very frightening experience and a very hindering experience too. Shortly thereafter, we were put up against a new challenge. We were just getting over the pandemic, and then we put up against a new challenge, which is posed by artificial intelligence, and it's been giving a lot of talk in the social medias and in the business world. How do you see the possible outcomes we might come up against in the short future, in the medium future? How do you see this scenario as a whole?
So looking at kind of AI and the way that human beings are interacting with it, I guess with an emphasis on their well-being.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's so, as you say, lockdown and the pandemic was a huge experience for human beings. And you know this very well in your work. What causes human beings to get stressed, two key things are change and uncertainty, right? Having to adapt and not knowing what's going to happen. And it takes a lot of energy as well. And so when we went through the pandemic, and indeed we're still kind of coming out of it, there was an experience for people of, a very real fear. So normally when we talk about, I'm sure you do this with your clients as well, when we talk about the sort of stress response of human beings, normally we sort of say, our nervous system reacts to any threat as though it's a threat to our lives, right? So you sit down at your computer and your inbox is full, or you get stuck in traffic and you're running late, or, these sorts of things. And we have a stress response that is sort of outdated survival mechanism that is as though there's a threat to our lives. And one of the ways of working with that is sort of pausing and, taking a breath and reframing and realizing, okay, this isn't a threat to my life. I just have a full inbox, and making a bit of space around that. And how can I work with that? And so we had to do a bit of that in the pandemic, but the unusual circumstances were that we were also being told this actually is a threat to your lives, which normally, certainly with the people I work with, which is leaders and, knowledge workers mostly, usually when we're stressed, it's not really that sort of threat, right? So we had these different sort of stresses and challenges to our well-being, which was that we had to, adapt. We were told you have to stay home, you need to wash your hands, you need to wear masks, get a vaccine. And so there were a lot of things that we were told, to protect our own lives and other people's lives. That created a lot of fear. And then we also had to change. So we had to learn how to work from home. And that takes a lot of energy. To learn how to do things that used to be automated in a new way, right? We're here on Zoom together. And it's quite natural. We didn't need a sort of hour-long tutorial together beforehand about how to use Zoom. But in the start of lockdown, we did, right? Everyone was struggling and we were constantly on mute and people didn't know how to get off of mute. And, people accidentally had, cat face and all of these sorts of things as we learned how to deal with this technology, right? So that took a lot of energy to deal with that situation because there was change and there was also uncertainty. We didn't know what was going to happen. And then just as we're coming out of that, we have this new change and uncertainty together with a very real threat, which is AI. And so what I'm hearing a lot from the companies that I work with is that what they see right now already before we had this new challenge of an awareness, or perhaps more of an awareness of concerns about AI, is that people are exhausted. Lockdown was quite exhausting for people. And what I'm hearing is that people are saying, we sort of came out of lockdown and then it was back to normal or some sort of new normal, which is maybe hybrid working, a bit in the office, a bit at home. But we're still having to learn a lot and adapt. And people are saying, I didn't really get the chance to digest the experience of lockdown. And I haven't had the chance to recover from that. And now already there's this new challenge of having to go back to normal and, remember how to socialize with other human beings and, work from home and the office at the same time. And then just at this moment, so in November last year, ChatGPT was launched. And this seems to have been a sort of tipping point for public awareness and concern about AI, because we already knew about AI. Some of us were aware of some of the concerns about it. I joined the Oxford AI Society 5 or 6 years ago because I thought I just want to have some understanding of what's happening and what's developing, right? But now ChatGPT, just in a few months, already there are tens of millions of interactions with it every single day. And then, of course, in March, we had Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak and 1,800 other concerned researchers saying, actually, maybe we need to pause a bit the development of AI, right? Because, I think realistically, we have, tens of thousands of people working on making AI better and faster and, developing it, developing this intelligence. And maybe a few hundred people working on how to make it safer. So then you have this announcement from people actually working in the field saying, ooh, maybe we need to pause a bit and look at how we're doing this. And then last week, we had 350 concerned scientists and, people, even Geoffrey Hinton, who's one of the sort of developers of ChatGPT, and people from, Google DeepMind saying, actually, this should be a global priority on the same social scale as pandemics and nuclear war. So it's quite a lot for human beings at the moment, and I think the key points to look at is that we don't know exactly what the threat is to AI in terms of our lives. That's not clear yet. But we do know things are going to change a lot. And there is uncertainty. And so the very real issue to deal with now is that there's change and uncertainty. And change and uncertainty are not new. Change and uncertainty have been part of the human condition for as long as we know, and always will be, right? We'll always have change, and we'll always have uncertainty. We'll always need to adapt to new circumstances and situations, and it's not all bad. Some change is good, and it's us developing and growing and so on. And uncertainty is really the only thing we can be certain about, is that there is uncertainty. And so because these are not new challenges for human beings, we also have tools and knowledge for how to work with change and uncertainty. So I think having an awareness that, yes, this is a challenging time. There is a lot that will make human beings stressful now. And the kind of double whammy of pandemic and then starting to realize the potential threats and the pace of development, the fast pace of development of AI, having these two together, it makes sense that people would feel stressed, anxious, and so on. But also we have tools for how to work with that skillfully.
Mhm.
Yeah,
and what, in your experience and in your work, what tools do you see? What resources? What kind of skills can we develop? Can we cultivate in order to kind of reduce the emotional impact of change? Let's say the uncertainty. In days gone by, our uncertainty was maybe even more life-threatening than it is in nowadays. I mean, in days gone by, people died more. It was more
yeah.
common for people to die, and in the remote past, even more. So, what resources, what kind of skills, what kind of capacities can we enhance, can we develop in the sense of dealing with the emotional impact of VUCA, right? Because it's volatile, uncertain. It's the
Complex and ambiguous.
that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It could hardly be less inviting. Called volatility, uncertainty, and these tools, these resources, these skills, in your experience, which have been profitable in your training and in your experience?
Yeah. Okay. So so VUCA world, right? This is actually a military term, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, as you said. And this was a term we were using before AI, before the pandemic, just with the kind of changing world, just through kind of technology, that the way that we work is increasingly VUCA. And that in order for human beings to work well and live well and feel well in that context, it's good to, first of all, understand why it's challenging, and then to have tools in your toolbox for how to deal with it. So we just talked about, in part, why it's challenging. You have to exert much more energy to learn and develop. And, we're not just doing things on autopilot anymore. We have to be constantly developing and keeping up pace with technology. And then uncertainty causes stress, complexity. Our brains are processing far more data probably than human brains ever have before. If you think about how many emails people receive and text messages, just the amount that we're reading and communicating, and how quickly we're expected to reply to things. It's a lot, right? And so a natural response to that is a stress response or anxiety and exhaustion. But so what are the tools that we know help with that, which is more your question? And I think what we find to be most effective, and so when I work with companies, I also work on the research of this. So we evaluate interventions that we do with leaders, and we say, okay, what before and after, what really changes for them. And so resilience is key here. And this is a bit, in mindfulness, sometimes we talk about you can't control the waves in the ocean, right? You can't always control the external environment. There will be waves, there will be ups and downs, there will be rough weather and things that are difficult to navigate. But you can learn how to surf, which means you can learn how to ride the waves, right? And so, the skills and capacities that seem to be most necessary, first of all, resilience. And resilience, usually we think of it as our ability to withstand pressure or bounce back after pressure. And it is that, but it's also our ability to learn and develop and grow through periods of pressure and change. And if we look at what makes human beings resilient, what you see in the research are, several things. One is mindset, ability to keep a positive mindset. And you know a lot about this from your work. We have a negativity bias as human beings. We're wired to look for and pay much more attention to negative information rather than positive information. And what that means is that we can get a sort of imbalanced and unrealistic view of things, an overly negative view of things, which then causes us more stress. So the kind of skill of a positive mindset, learning how to pay attention to the positive as well as the negative. In the case of AI, if we bring it back to that, that we can see, all of the reasons that we can be fearful about AI. People's jobs being done better by computers, people losing their jobs or having to change the way they do their jobs, and or indeed the destruction of humanity seems to be on the table now as well. But there's also positivity, right? Even so, if you look at law firms now, law firms are using AI. They're using AI to aid with due diligence, to come up with legal decisions, to draft documents, and this sort of thing. And that can potentially be very positive. That can be work that is draining for lawyers. So it can save time, it can save energy. It can mean lawyers have more time to really be present and, face to face with clients, or even take a bit of time off and, take care of their well-being. So learning how to train the mind to focus on the positive, not that we ignore the negative, not that we pretend that things are nice when they aren't, but that we realize the brain will have a tendency to sort of disregard or filter out positive information in favor of the negative. And there's an intelligent survival mechanism involved in that, which isn't really relevant anymore, right? Or rarely relevant. So training the mind to look for, okay, also what's good in this? What is the positive? So positive mindset is key to resilience. And then relaxation. And, I think it's important for people to realize that relaxation is a skill. And it's a skill that most of us haven't learned. So even in our very thorough education, probably we weren't taught, and now here's how you relax, right? Most people are really not good at relaxing. And especially I work mostly with leaders, right? Leaders are high endurance. They're usually really good in endurance and really poor in relaxation, which means we can sort of keep going, but we don't recover, right? So learning how to relaxation is a skill. And if you're not good in it, people don't need to feel bad about that. It makes sense. We weren't taught how to relax, but essentially it's a skill of learning to regulate your nervous system. And then I think there are many points we could talk about here, but I think the ones that are most effective to your question is positive mindset, ability to relax, and then also an ability to sort of keep an eye on the bigger picture, that we also sort of take care of our that we don't sort of get stuck in the details or sort of go down a rabbit hole, but that we're actually able to see the big picture and have sort of clarity on that. Those are some key aspects of resilience. I mean, there are many more, but that's probably a good starting point.
Kind of having looking at a larger scenario, maybe a larger picture, not getting so caught in. And then we have as you have previously spoken of, we have the emotional impact of this lack of relaxation. It has, and it's organic, isn't it? It's kind of hormones and vascular regulation, and we have a whole amount of what we call biomarkers of stress. And then you have, it's the idea of an elastic band. We pull, we strain it, but then it doesn't have enough time to kind of get back to its original dimension. It stays strained continuously. And you're talking about relaxation. I was thinking about that. It's the giving your organism, and then there's an organic aspect to it, isn't it? Isn't it? Giving your organism sufficient time to recover, to kind of.
Exactly.
It takes time because it's an organism. It's matter. It's kind of
yes, we're not computers that switch on and off with the button.
Yeah. We have molecules. We have biological molecules. We have structures we have to learn to respect. Does that make any sense?
Completely. Okay. And I think often when I work with people, I say it's important to remember that because we function a lot on autopilot, we can also get kind of stuck in states, building on your point. So I usually say a stressed nervous system tends to seek out more stress. So we get kind of comfortable with the state of stress. And then to your point, we need moments where, if this is sort of high stress, we need moments where we come down to zero. And that takes time. We need to sort of recover. We need time in parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. And then there will be another moment of pressure. But the key is that we can that we have this flexibility. We can be in sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We can be in kind of activation, and we can be in rest. And I think what you see, I work quite a bit with heart rate variability with clients. We actually measure heart rate, and then you can see when the people are stressed or relaxed. And what you tend to see is that most of us are in a state of sort of mild to moderate stress most of the time. So, I think what sort of we could say that the nervous system almost becomes familiar with that and then tends to seek it out. So we're sort of maybe a healthy neutral point is down here, right? Not so much stress. Yes. But we become used to this as the neutral point. This is the baseline. Yes. And then even when people have moments where they could relax, right? Maybe you've got 30 minutes between meetings. And okay, what you could do is really you go for a walk, have a cup of tea, meditate, do these things that we know, have a nap. But what do people do if they've got 30 minutes between meetings? They quickly do some emails or they make some phone calls. They try to kind of squeeze things in. So, what we find is that we start to lose our ability to relax because we don't do it often enough. And being in a state of relaxation actually starts to feel uncomfortable to people. Up here in moderate stress feels comfortable. I feel productive. I'm getting things done. It's almost like I'm burning this kind of energy, right? Yes. And so does that sound familiar in your work as well?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. By all means. Sometimes we have this, what we call it an upregulation. Biologists like to say an upregulation of basal functioning levels, let us say. So you kind of, and then you're here, but you think here is normal, here is home. But that's not what your organism thinks, because your organism has a working of its own. It has a mind of its own. And sometimes people who are striving to acquire certain life habits and anyways, trying to improve the way they treat themselves ultimately. And they don't understand, they don't understand that the organism, note, I'm jumping body, I'm specifically stressing organism. It takes its own time. So to bring it down, you have to let your organism do it. I mean, you need sleep. You need to sleep the number of hours your organism demands. It's not the time your work schedule tells you can sleep, kind of. Right? Make sense?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So,
in a certain way, we have to be kind of patient with ourselves. Kind of, in Portuguese, we say acolhedor. when you receive something loving kindly. I don't get a word right now in English, but it's kind of something like a mother that embraces a child, something that's quite relieving. We have to have that kind of approach to ourselves because our organism takes time. So you have to be patient, patient and caring with yourself, cherishing maybe. Make sense?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and that starts with self-awareness, right? Of being aware. How do I actually feel? Have I become accustomed to this level of stress and I'm sort of seeking it out? Do I need a break? Am I getting enough sleep? Do we have the introception, right? The kind of internal mindfulness, the ability to sense our internal sensations that we know how we're feeling. And then, as you say, then the impulse and the desire actually to take care of ourselves. And, I wonder a little bit with, it's interesting to come out of lockdown where probably we all got even more familiar with quite high levels of stress or sympathetic activation, right? So it's sort of interesting that now, as that probably starts to die down a bit as we go back to normal. Now there's ChatGPT, and then, I wonder if we're a little bit seeking out another threat, It's not to diminish because obviously, there is a threat, right? But I wonder if there's a little bit of human beings we're seeking, something big again, that our nervous systems can go back to that familiar zone of stress and concern. Yeah.
And maybe something that is extremely stressful, which is harm avoidance. The harm avoidance Professor Dr. Cloninger talks about, which is seeing threat in anything that's, because something can be challenging, not necessarily threatening. But we tend to mix the two things together. We kind of confound them. And and I think we probably came out of the lockdown, the threatening lockdown, in an extreme defensive fashion. And maybe we didn't have enough time to get out of this defensive mode and kind of giving ourselves a fair chance to deal with the challenges of artificial intelligence. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. Yeah.
And well, it's we think about when we talk about there's a lot of talk going on about the healthy aspect of getting back to nature. Nature walk. In Japan, there are some studies that point that walking between trees seems to be special. Yeah, it seems to be. And I was surprised to see, because as I'm a physician, I always have a look for certain things. Surprisingly, some fungi, some antimicrobial substances are let down by the trees. The trees kind of let it fall on the floor, on the forest floor, to avoid the proliferation of certain kinds of fungi. And these substances are healthy to us. Yeah, they're healthy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to our immunity. So in Japan, they recommend people to walk in the forest, specifically in the forest, not just a garden, in the forest, be covered by vegetation. Now, I was imagining that there are other ways also. We can't always afford a promenade, but we can maybe afford coming back to our senses, coming back to ourselves, because our organism is, in its own merit, nature, isn't it? I mean, I'm wearing glasses here, but these eyes, they are 100% natural. I mean,
I believe you.
yeah. So does that make any sense in your field of work, in your experience, this kind of coming back to having a glass of tea, paying a cup of tea, paying attention to myself, not taking myself for granted? Isn't that in its own sense, isn't it a way of getting back to nature in ourselves? Make any sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, and there's because there's 2 points to that, and they both relate a bit, also to the way that our brains function in terms of, well, I think the first part is more an emotional reconnecting with ourselves, right? And I think there's a lot of, I certainly see in my coaching work, people often saying, I just want to come back to myself, or come back to my nature, to kind of realign with myself. And the sort of feeling that the more that we engage with technology, and the busier we are and the more complexity we're dealing with, we can sort of lose track of ourselves, or kind of be misaligned with who we are. So I think there's certainly something in that is quite important. And then in the way that we do that, I more and more now, when I do leadership retreats, I really try to push to have them in nature. Not in the office, or not in a kind of conference center somewhere, but let's go into the countryside, country house, exactly as you say, walk in the forest, put phones and computers away. And there's something that reconnecting with nature, being in nature, the kind of naturalness of it, the slowness of it, the quiet and or natural sounds does seem to help us also come back to ourselves. And I notice in group facilitation, and I've talked with colleagues who are also noticing this, that you sort of see bigger impact in groups when you bring them into nature, and especially get them off their phones and their laptops. But the kind of brain aspect of that, also with your point, is that, and this is, I'm sure you work with this as well, because we talk about it a lot with mindfulness practices, but a lot of what we're doing in a mindfulness practice is down regulating the default mode network in the brain, or we sometimes call it the narrative network, which is the blah, blah, blah of your mind, the constant chatter, which in your work even more than I do, a lot of our stress and anxiety comes from this narrative, comes from the thoughts and the conversations and commentary of ourselves, right, that we have in our heads. And so we down regulate that by connecting more with our direct experience network. And I always tell people when they're learning meditation, any moment in your life that you want to turn down the volume of this narrative because you want to be present or you want to be relaxed, this is part of the skill of relaxation, you activate the direct experience network. And what that means is you bring your attention to your senses. You come back to your senses. We even have an expression in English, come back to your senses. I don't know if you have something like that in Portuguese. Coming back to your senses is like being sane, essentially.
Yeah. We say something, it's quite interesting. We say falling into the real, cair na real. Yeah.
Falling into the real.
The real, yeah. It's an adjective, real,
Yes.
but then we turn it into a noun and we put an article in front of it. So
beautiful.
Kind of falling awake, like John Kabat-Zinn plays a lot, he says.
Yes.
Don't fall asleep, you fall awake. We in Portuguese say fall in the real. Kind of come back to your senses. Yeah. Get back here. Get back here. Kind of help. Se liga, connect yourself.
Connect yourself.
Like when you connect a plug, you say, connect yourself. It's kind of realize where you are, kind of realize what you're doing. It has that sense to me. Just look what the hell you're doing, kind of being quite.
Well, so everything's more beautiful in Brazilian Portuguese, I have to say. But yeah, I mean, it's the same concepts, right? Which is the sense that, it's really beautiful kind of falling into the real, or we say coming back to your senses, because when you come back to your senses, you're coming back to reality. So you could say you're falling into the real, because your thoughts are not reality. They're your commentary on things, right? But what you smell, what you see, what you feel in your body, what you hear, this is all happening now, right? This is all more a kind of reality, not our projection or not our thoughts about it. And so there's something quite soothing to the nervous system and quite, good for reconnecting with our nature, coming back to our senses. And of course, we can do that anywhere, but how lovely to do it in nature when your senses are more delighted by
Yes.
fresh air and beautiful scenery and bird song
Yep.
and all of that.
Because it's almost as if we were born, we were made to be in contact with these things. I mean, imagine a stream, the noise of a stream rolling. One of the things that I personally, myself, I've always enjoyed camping. And that's a very
Oh, yeah.
weird, it's a very weird taste. People ask, what do you see in camping? I love to hear the crickets in the night. The crickets. Is there anything more relaxing, anything more involving than crickets? We have YouTube channels where it's 3 hours of cricket noise.
Really?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. So these things that it's as if we were born to sunbathe, doesn't it? We seem to be innately prone to these. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's something sort of soothing. I mean, I'm with you. I also like camping, but I
I don't.
grew up partly in Colorado, so that was sort of the norm to to like camping in the mountains. But yeah, there is something. It's sort of you kind of it's almost like you settle into your nature when you're
Yes,
surrounded by nature. Yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah.
As if you come to an agreement with yourself, kind of, sort of. You go back
Yes.
home, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Come back to an agreement with yourself.
Mm.
Yeah.
Uh, please, I felt you were going to say something. Sorry, I
No,
cut
I
you.
was just
No.
appreciating your comment. Yeah.
And then we have down here in Brazil, we are very prone on we're keen on the discussion of nature and nurture.
Hmm.
So, what is cultural? What is inherent to man? And well, it's about being cultivating psychological well-being.
Mm-hmm.
It's a task. It's a task, and it's a learning. Um, I would say we're also something a concept I usually work with what is objective and what is subjective.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to neglect subjectiveness. We tend to value or overvalue objectiveness. So
Mm-hmm.
you get your task done. How you feel about it, it don't matter. Just
Right.
get this thing done. In
Uh-huh.
Portuguese, we say, paying me well, what harm can there be? Pagando bem, que mal tem. Kind of. But yes, there is a lot of bad things can come when we don't take ourselves into consideration sufficiently. And
Mm.
I would even add something here. I would say something a little more challenging, which is also being at peace, in peace terms with your ethical convictions. I mean, it seems very important, at least the people I work with. It's very
Mm.
important that they be correctly aligned ethically with what they do, kind of
Mm.
feeling that their values are not being disrespected or violated in some way. Is that, do you have a similar experience with your work, with your trainings, people, that kind of people seeking to be kind of in agreement with what they do?
Yeah, I think increasingly so.
Yeah.
Increasingly so. And part of this is people want more meaningful work. They want to feel that their life has meaning. I think I always remind people that, and I'm surprised that people aren't aware of it, that, basically the majority of your waking hours in the day and the majority of your living adult years, you will be at work, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're asleep, right? You'll be
Right.
at work, right? So that's sort of your life, right? So let's make sure that we do that part really well, that it's not sort of that we try to have the good life outside of the times that we're working. What I've found, when I've worked with companies and senior leaders in Brazil, I've got the sense that people are a little better at that than we are in Europe and North America. That's my sense. But probably something we still all need to work on. But I do see that people, especially this younger generation that are entering the workforce, they want work that is meaningful. And I think that's very sensible because it is our lives, right? And I think there's a natural human desire to have meaning and purpose and be aligned with our values. And I mean, some of the sort of neuroscience looking at what makes human beings happy, is that we need to have our basic material needs fulfilled, that we have food to eat
Mm-hmm.
and physical safety and, in today's reality that we can pay our bills and not stress about it, that sort of thing. We need to have good human connections. And then the third is that we need to have meaning and purpose, that there's something that makes it all worthwhile. And that usually comes from, our value system, which most of us haven't really examined so much. What do we really value? So I do see people wanting that more. And I think it's a very good sign that we should prioritize that much more. And indeed, back to the AI question, I think it's more important now than ever that as human beings, we're really clear what our values are. Now that we've developed this this technology that will be, smarter than us and, possibly take over in many ways. It's really important as that develops, and I think this is what people are starting to say more loudly now. What are our values as humanity, and are we developing AI with
Mm-hmm.
those human values in mind? As well, particularly that, we develop AI that isn't a threat to us, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, I studied. I studied. I was thinking here, maybe ethical might be in English might sound a little bit stronger, a little bit harsher, maybe than in Portuguese. I mean, but when I'm talking about unethical, I mean, with ethics, I mean, how well synchronized is
Mm-hmm.
your one symphony with what they do, and then it comes. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this doesn't this. I was listening to what you were saying here. Doesn't this take us also to the item of transcendence, personal transcendence, kind of living my values, aspiring to be doing things that have a more collective, a more a larger meaning than just my specific subsistence, my specific individual needs. Doesn't isn't there a taste, a touch of transcendence in the idea?
Hmm. Yeah, the sense of something greater than myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I find that idea quite comforting, really, and quite motivating and inspiring. Since I'm part of something larger. There's a bigger spectrum of things, and my acts, my actions can have consequences, and I suffer the consequences of other people's acts. Gives me the impression that it's kind of transcending. It can well dealt with. It can take us to some kind of a higher level of maybe existence in the sense in the Sartrean sense, as Jean-Paul Sartre,
Mm.
the existential,
Mm.
taking our existence into a. Does it make any sense?
It does. It does. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I would agree with you in my own experience and certainly working with other people
Mm-hmm.
that, as or you said, I work on human flourishing, right? That's what's interesting to me, is how do human beings live their best lives in the unique context we find ourselves in, and as that context shifts. And certainly, what we seem to find is that part of human flourishing is that there's something that's meaningful, and usually what people find deep meaning in is something greater than ourselves, whether that's through spirituality or just through the way we conduct ourselves. That it's not just about me, right? And it really, more that we feel it's just about me, usually the more anxious and depressed people become, right? The more that we kind of expand beyond that. And this is where we get into compassion and that sort of thing. The more we expand beyond that and see the bigger picture, the common humanity, and this sense of transcendence, as you say, usually the better people feel, I find.
Mm-hmm. And I would risk. I just wanted to check if you agree with, in your experience, makes sense to this. But this idea of transcendence, this idea of more collective kind of, it's extremely healthy. It's health enhancing. I mean, we can take better decisions. We can make better decisions. We can take better care of ourselves. And principally, there's something that always occurs to me is we can take ourselves for granted. We cease to be surprised with ourselves. And that, for me, sounds. I would love to hear your opinion. My personal one, my experiences, that could be extremely boring. If I cannot be surprised at myself anymore, if I cannot be surprised by life, things can get tedious. And I once wrote that boring, tedious experience is stressful. To be bored is to be stressed. Just make the picture. I mean, if I work on something that's boring me, I get stressed.
Yes. Yeah.
So to be bored is not a very healthy experience, kind of, so to say. And then you have some experiences with unfortunately, with some guinea pigs, experimental situations. And you check, you see the changes you have in the neuroendocrine axis. Yeah, with that. Now, thinking makes sense.
It does. I mean, I was just going to add, I think there's, with boredom, there are kind of two components to it. One is the kind of tedium that you're describing, right? Like doing really tedious tasks. And certainly you can see in working life, very often people are less motivated, enjoy their jobs less, and are less, their performance is depleted a bit when they're doing tedious tasks, right? Tasks that aren't inspiring to them, where they're not learning and developing and growing, where there's not kind of curiosity, that sort of thing. But then I think there's another kind of boredom. And so with that, I would agree with you, right? That can make people stressed or low mood, and certainly our performance decreases as well as our, kind of enjoyment and well-being. But I think there's another kind of boredom that I think people perhaps could embrace more, and we could call it boredom or something else. But I think the more we live in a sort of overstimulated world, right, where we're so kind of used to having our phones with us constantly and being on computers and watching Netflix and these things, that our brains are overstimulated. We're just, processing tons of information. And I think we get a bit addicted to stimulation. I make the joke with clients sometimes, your phone dings And how long is it before you look at your phone? It probably, not even a second. It's sort of ding, and then it's, ooh, what is that, right? Sometimes someone else's phone dings. It's not even your phone, and it's not your phone, but you still look at your phone because there was a ding, right? And so an overstimulated brain tends to seek out more stimulation.
Okay.
And so we can easily get into this, what's next, what's next, what's next, give me more stimulation. Or you might see people watching Netflix, and if it gets a bit boring, then they take out their phone and they're also on Instagram to have a little more stimulation for the boring bit. So I think there's also something, and I think this is looking at boredom in a different way than you described it, but I think there's also something important in making friends with boredom. Boredom in the sense of just allowing ourselves to be, and to be without stimulation, because an overstimulated brain actually, to your point earlier, needs rest, right? Needs calm, needs time to just kind of be. We need sort of recovery time. And if we are sort of overstimulated, we become sort of afraid of boredom. We become afraid of just being. We try to avoid it and with more stimulation. So I think there's also something in a lot of meditation practice, as from your experience, is quite boring, right? It's just kind of you and your mind and your breath, right? Following your breath. I don't know about my breath isn't very interesting, right? I've spent thousands of hours resting my mind on my breath.
Yes.
So far, not that interesting. And so there's something beautiful in that boring quality of just being with the simplicity of things without stimulation, which I think is quite powerful to make friends with that. And meditation is a tool for that as well.
Yeah. No, it makes
Would
all
you agree?
sense. Yeah, I agree totally. When I talk about boredom, I'm referring myself more to that unquietness, that uneasiness, unease that comes. Yeah, that's kind of when you feel bored, you kind of become rebellious against that kind of more uh, um, stable state, kind of saying that kind of the exactly what you get when you go what John Kabat-Zinn calls deep wisdom kind of stuff. It's the Greeks call it nous. It's
right.
wisdom. It's kind of, and that is a place where, let us say, novelty doesn't come up at every 3-4 seconds like in the social nets. We in Brazil, we have a problem, and it's been a motive, it's been a theme of some congresses of ours, of the Brazilian congresses on mental health, which is electronic addiction. And that's especially problematic with teenagers. And they manifest a behavior which is extremely parallel to what we call behavioral dependencies. They have to be checking what's going on. They sleep with their device connected. They fall asleep with the device. They wake up and they go on the device. And if they cannot have access to any device, they immediately go to sleep. And
interesting.
Yeah,
they go to sleep.
Yes, it's exactly what you have in a behavioral addiction, and you have it specifically with electronics. And the people that deal with that recommend the limitation of the number of hours a day the youngster may have contact with his social net and with his games and all that kind of thing, because it's extremely compelling. It's extremely seductive.
Is that a sort of, I suspect Brazil isn't the only country with this problem. I certainly see it at Oxford. I see it a bit with my students when I ask them to put their phones away. You can see this sort of anxiety and, some of them sort of reaching for their bags automatically to get their phones out and then remembering and stopping. So I can see that in, I don't know that I've taught in a country yet where I haven't seen
That
that.
kind
I
of
was even in Bhutan a few months ago, and even in the monasteries, people were on their phones quite a bit. So it seems to be widespread. But the way you're talking about it, are you talking about it as an addiction, almost like like a substance addiction, like alcohol or that sort of thing? Is there a
no.
similarity in that
There
sense?
is a similarity, but there is a separation line, very distinct. This is not due to external substances, but in the mechanism, in the neurobiologic mechanism, you have some similarities. You don't have external substances that are more potent, but you do mobilize internal, native substances, dopamine,
Yeah. Right.
noradrenaline,
Right.
serotonin, and so on and so forth. So you have that the reward system. We have the brain reward system, which is activated. It's activated in a less potent way than if you inhale cocaine, for instance, or heroin. But nevertheless, it's a very similar behavior, a mechanism. And
Yes.
as you become more and more addicted, you need to to go to that more and more frequently. And
Uh-huh. Okay.
the shorter the time between the stimulus and the reward, the shorter the time, the more addictive it becomes. We have a very
Mm.
cute
Hmm.
example. I'm not sure in Europe, but here in Brazil we have something called video poker.
I don't know. I don't know if we have that,
Uh,
but I'm often behind on the times with these
uh,
things.
Poker has a reputation of being very, very addictive. It's a
Hmm.
it's a gambling game which is extremely addictive, and people kind of lose fortunes with it.
Right.
Then a few years ago, you had video poker, where the cards were distributed by a machine. You just clicked and you had your game. So it was faster than when you had a croupier, and the croupier would distribute the cards, and then you pick them up and you start building your and see what you had in it. It was
Mm.
very rapid. You just click the button, and the shuffle was immediate, and the cards were on the screen. And this turned out to be more addictive than conventional poker.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we have that problem also. Like in days gone by, we had pinball.
Hmm.
When I was a kid, there were pinball galleries. The games you have today, the resolution is faster. They're more addictive.
Right.
You play more
Yeah.
times within
Because it's
half an hour.
faster when it, do you mean because it's faster when the computer sets it up and just deals out the cards? I
Yeah.
see.
You don't waste time. Just
Interesting.
gamble, 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 gamble. And that's more kind of sort of treacherous. It's more addictive than the regular card game. So
Mm.
we have that kind of situation also. We have a and by the way, it is extremely noxious to the emotional health of those kids.
Hmm.
They lose their motivation, they change their emotional pattern of responding to their parents, to challenges, to friends. They have a complete different social construction around them. It can be a problem, really. So we have that.
Gosh, yeah. I think we certainly have that in the UK and in Europe and North America as well, from what I've
I
seen.
imagine. Yes, I imagine. I mean,
Definitely a global problem with.
yeah, I talk about the population with whom I directly deal with it, but I believe it's far fairly disseminated.
Yeah, where
So
where smartphones have gone, right?
yeah,
Smartphones are widely available to people, to children especially. This seems to be an issue. Yeah.
worldwide,
Yes. And
all over
what
the
is
place.
Brazil? how is the problem being addressed? Have you found something effective yet?
The treatment, we have a few universities. We have some university centers which are dedicating specific attention to those who have become addicted. But then we have to think about the prophylactic, the preventive strategies, how to avoid these things
Right,
happening and
and
minimize
preventative
it.
measures have more
Yeah,
of a
yeah.
ROI, more impact.
And in that, we are still kind of crawling, but I know that worldwide it's pretty much the same thing. First, you have the technological advance, and then you start building the skills, the how to deal with the consequences, kind of. I believe it's a little bit what people are slightly scared of with AI. They kind of also, because it's the same movement. I mean, AI, first the technology comes,
Mm.
and then we got to see what we're going to do with it. Sort of.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Makes sense that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or what it's going to do with us in the
What it's going to do with us, yeah.
scarier picture. Yeah.
There is a video on YouTube. It's where these powerful processors they remind us of rebellious slaves, kind of. In the past, we had slaves. Men had slaves, and the slaves did their jobs. So Domenico De Masi talks a lot about that. But then, what's the terror? The terror is the slave uh, becomes rebellious and takes over.
Mm.
And the slave was the guy who knew how to do all the stuff. Then he
Yes,
takes over.
AI being the slave in this
Yeah,
instance.
a
Right.
mean, rebellious slave. Sort of,
Gosh.
so to say, yeah, kind of. It's fantasistic, of course, but then, as you said, uh, um, we always think our minds always work in the sense of predicting the worst. So maybe all these cultural things have some contribution. Makes sense?
Well, yes, and I think it's, I don't think it's I think what we're sort of hearing, especially in the last weeks and months, is scientists saying actually that's quite possible, that scenario where I mean, one thing to bear in mind, why are humans the dominant species on the planet in many ways, right? That we're not the biggest, obviously, right? There are animals that are bigger than us. We're not the fastest or the physically strongest,
Yeah.
but we do, at least we think, we're the smartest, we're the most intelligent, and we're amazing collaborators, right? Human
Yeah.
beings are really great collaborators. Whereas we've just developed something that very rapidly is becoming more intelligent than us and a better collaborator, right? So at some point, one AI learns something and then all AI know that, right? So that's an amazing collaboration. It's instantaneous. So that, I think there's researchers seem to be saying there is a realistic threat in that our planet seems to operate in a way where the most intelligent is in charge, and we're developing something that will be more likely be more intelligent than us and a better collaborator. So not just science fiction, perhaps.
Yeah. 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 It makes no sense. We've been talking a lot about psychological well-being, uncertainty, and the challenges of our historical moment, the historical moment we are all living. And I would think that when we talk about these items, psychological well-being, returning to our senses, taking care of our health, artificial intelligence doesn't have a health to take care of. A machine doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't have the same level of responsibility we have upon ourselves. When we think about these issues, in your experience and in your way of dealing with things, what do you understand are things that are very important in these items, and maybe they don't get sufficiently stated. They're not sufficiently ventilated. They could be of great benefit if they were a little more viralized, kind of thing.
Yeah, good question. So what's important, but we're not talking about it enough, or we don't understand it enough. Important to our well-being. Well, I think compassion is, we're starting to understand more about compassion. There's a lot more research on compassion. You can look at Jim Doty's work at Stanford, or Kelly McGonigal also at Stanford. You can look at Tanya Singer from, who was researching at the Max Planck Institute, and others. We understand more about compassion. And I think cultivating compassion as a human capacity is probably quite key at the moment. And it is gaining because there's more research into it. Usually, these things become more mainstream when we understand them better scientifically in today's world, right? Compassion isn't new. It's an innate human capacity. And there have been practices which cultivate compassion, which cultivate that capacity for thousands of years. But I do think that's probably one that is increasingly important. And, maybe just to say compassion, because I think often in, Latin languages, in certainly I think I've heard in Spanish, and I imagine in Portuguese, when you say compassion, it can often have this kind of subtle sense of more like pity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Feeling sorry for a bit. Yeah.
Not very subtle. Yes.
Oh, not even subtle. Okay. Okay. So since we have a Portuguese speaking audience, probably mainly here, maybe good to sort of clarify compassion. Yes. So I think in this sense, and there are different definitions of compassion, which are, many of them are very good. But the sense that sort of it's our innate human capacity to be able to meet our own and other people's experience, the full experience, the beautiful aspects of the human experience, but also the difficult, the challenging, the suffering aspects of the human experience. We could also say animals and extend it to, all sentient beings. To be able to recognize it, meet it fully, and then also feel the sense of care towards it, and actually wanting to alleviate the difficulty and the suffering aspects of it. So there's this sort of recognizing, caring, and then wanting to help in some way, right? Wanting people to be free from that sort of difficulty. And that's an innate human capacity. But it's also something that if we don't use it, a bit like, we have muscles, if we train them, they're stronger, and we use them more because they're strong, right? If we don't train our muscles, they're still there, but they sort of, they're not as active, they're not as strong, and we're not using them as much, right? So, I think cultivating human compassion is quite important. And that's both for, the points we talked about earlier. This is quite a difficult time for human beings. There's rapid change, right? We're living in ways that human beings haven't lived before, and the change is happening very, very quickly compared to other changes, like agricultural revolution, industrial revolution. They took a lot more time to, come about. And now we have, with technology, things changing very quickly. And there's a lot of uncertainty and change, and we're processing lots of information, and we're overstimulated and addicted to phones and disconnected from ourselves, and all of these things, right? We have to remind people to go into nature because it's healthy for them, right? So I think particularly in these times, there's a lot that's good in these times, right? And important to note, technology has brought a lot of good as well, and probably will continue to do so. It's not all bad. But we can meet that there is difficulty, and we can meet that with compassion. We can meet it with honestly looking at things and then also feeling a sense of care. And when we see in ourselves that we are stressed or anxious or struggling a bit to deal with the reality of things as they are, or to adapt to the necessary changes in our working life and in our daily life, that we could meet that with a sense of compassion. And this is a sort of non-judgmental, I'm a human being with a brain wired for survival and a nervous system that is affected by that, and I'm having some natural human responses of stress or anxiety or whatever it is, and learning how to adapt, and sometimes getting it right and sometimes getting it wrong, and with the quality of non-judgment, sort of meeting that with a sense of care in the same way we would meet a friend. If you know a friend or one of your children or a loved one is suffering in a moment of difficulty, we would feel a care to them, and we would also want to alleviate their difficulty. So feeling that, cultivating that for ourselves, which starts with being present with ourselves, then there's this non-judgmental quality, and then this care. And then also expressing that to others. So I think compassion is probably one of the key capacities for human beings to be developing, that maybe we aren't talking about as much as might be helpful, and perhaps we will more and more as the research is maturing, and as the need for it is becoming more and more obvious.
Mhm. Maybe humanizing a little more our way of looking at ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And reconnecting with our humanity.
Yeah.
And that also goes, if we tie it back to AI, that also goes for the people developing AI, right? We should hope that they have really strong capacities for compassion, right?
Yeah.
That they're not just developing things without a real sense of the sort of safety and the kind of um, responsibility for humanity, and the care for human beings that hopefully can come with that.
Because technology, as you were talking, it just came to me. Technology does wonderful things, because this is one of them.
Yes.
When in the name of creation, when would we be able to get together, sit and have this wonderful talk and have passed this wonderful time together? You in Oxford and me in Sao Paulo.
Yes.
And we are doing it in
Yes.
real time. I mean, as if we were in the same room. And actually, the place here in Zoom, it is a room. It's called a room, and it's
That's true.
100%, and it's fantastic. And
Yeah.
what are we dealing with? We are transmitting compassion. We are sharing knowledge and the strategies for people to live better. And we owe that to whom? To technology. So
That's yes, very good point. Yes.
that's it. We are doing things we were unthinkable of a few years ago. And that cannot be looked down on. That cannot be forgotten. And that's fantastic. So I have a great deal of trust in the improvement technology makes, because we are collective. We are 7 billion. So you just can't make something that will make 7 billion people unhappy. At some point, things have a regulation, even if it is for the size of our human population in the world. Make sense? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you're demonstrating very well the point of also focusing on the positive with
Yes.
technology, right?
Yeah.
And we were able to have this discussion, you in
Mm.
Brazil and me in the UK,
Yeah.
in real time, right?
Yeah.
And the only downside to that is I don't have an excuse to come to Brazil.
The flying companies might not like it.
Yeah.
Uh, Sophie, I must thank you very much. Is there anything else you find interesting, relevant to bring to us now, this moment? Something occurs to you, comes to your mind?
I think, well, you know, maybe just to close, that people have some kind of action points, that with your kind of original questioning around how do we really work with the anxiety and stress of AI, and its development and the sort of unknown aspect of that. I made sort of 3 points that I thought maybe people can work with those, that they have some tools, right? That it's not just theoretical.
Yeah.
And interestingly, by chance, I then thought, after I wrote these, I sort of thought about it a lot over the last week since you brought the question to me. And then just before our chat, I thought I'll just ask Chat GPT what it thinks. I didn't want to ask sooner because I didn't want to be influenced by AI in this question of how do human beings work with the anxiety of AI. But when I asked Chat GPT, it came up with almost the exact same list that I came up with, which is interesting. Yeah. So, but it was longer, and mine is a little bit more compact. So I had sort of 3 things, so how do we work with anxiety about AI? And the first one is cultivating your awareness and understanding. And sort of doing this, we tend to be more fearful about things that we don't understand, right? So reading about AI, listening to the different arguments of what are researchers saying, what are philosophers saying, what are policymakers saying, that we sort of are up to date on this and we have some sort of understanding of what's happening. Not supposed to that we have that we don't feel like there's this thing happening and we have no idea what it is, right? But it's also so that it's not taking us by surprise, especially in our working life, where we end up in a defensive position, right? Suddenly there's Chat GPT, and now, at universities and schools, we're all scrambling to say, how do we deal with our students writing their essays with Chat GPT, right?
Yeah.
So now we're in a defensive position. Oh my goodness, we didn't see this aspect of it coming, right? So, for your working life and then also for your well-being, just keeping up to date with it. So reading about it, and then also experiment with it. Try out Chat GPT, that you know what it does, that it's not just something you're hearing about, but you have an experiential sense of it. Play with it a little bit. It's free. You can just set up an account and play with it. And then the next point is sort of social support and agency. Talk to people about it. Have conversations about it at dinner parties. What do you think about this? What do you think the risks are? What do you think the advantages are? How do you think it will affect your work? Or do you see it affecting your work already? And, these sorts of things. And then the agency aspect is, as I said, engage with it, but also, we're probably at a point now where we want policymakers to be considering regulations on AI, and really kind of thinking about what regulations can be put in place that we ensure that AI is working for the common good of humanity rather than working against humanity, in many ways that it could. And policymakers will pay more attention to it when human beings, when people are paying more attention to it, when it's something that people are talking about and actively thinking about. So social aspect, talk about it, have some sort of agency. And then the third point is take care of your well-being. And this we talked about a bit, but, as you were saying, get out into nature, get offline, right? Limit how often, don't go down a rabbit hole of, reading all this conspiracy and, science fiction ideas about, a sort of Terminator style future and that sort of thing, right? Maybe read different ideas, but right. Also, don't overwhelm yourself. Set boundaries for how much you're reading if it gets stressful to you. Get out in nature, get offline, do things that soothe your nervous system, like meditation, or some of the other things that we've talked about, as you were saying, getting enough sleep. So those are the 3 things that I think will probably be helpful to people: knowledge and understanding, social support and agency, and then really taking active care of your well-being along the way. That's it.
Thank you very much. Great contribution. And I am sure now our listeners are eager to maybe some of them might want to make. How can they reach you? How can they get in contact with you?
On LinkedIn, if they're on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn?
Yep. LinkedIn is probably the best. You can also contact me through Oxford, through the university, but I do check my LinkedIn, or even I was finally persuaded to join Instagram. I was trying to stay off social media, but I got persuaded in lockdown. So Instagram or LinkedIn or however. I only mention Instagram because the few times I've taught in Brazil, I notice everyone asks for my Instagram, not my LinkedIn. So
Yeah, I think
yeah.
Instagram is more popular than
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
okay.
Yeah.
So there
Okay,
we go.
then.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, your Instagram. Okay, then people will be addressing whatever they address to our channel, to our site, we'll be passing on to you. And on behalf of our listeners and myself, I thank you very much for your inestimable, priceless contribution. Thank you very much. It's a great help. And maybe our Brazilian listeners may want further information, and maybe we can come up with something in the brief future. Who knows? Okay.
Yes, let's do that. Well, thank you so much for having me, David. I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed our chat,
Very
and
good.
yeah, I look forward to more collaborations.